Thank you, Jungsen, for the invitation and the introduction. Thank you to all the organizers for having me here today. It's really a great pleasure to be here. As you said, my name is Andrew Wang. I am currently a programmer and the CTO of Supergiant Games. And I'm here today to talk about the early days of Supergiant, the making of Bastion, and to talk about the decisions that we made, the processes that we used, and basically to talk about sort of going indie, where Alex sort of talked about his adventures and his process as being sort of an individual developer right out of school, and Aaron sort of touched on a bit of the sort of the investor side as part of Indie Fund. Supergiant started as a company of sort of industry veterans to a certain extent. We all worked on AAA games beforehand, and then this is sort of about why we decided to go indie and what that means to us. So, for those who don't know, Supergiant Games started as two people in a house in South San Jose, California. The team eventually grew to 7 people. Shown here, we're sort of at the end of E3 2011, right before we tear down our booth. And we made a game called Bastion. And right now, I'm just going to play the trailer to Bastion, just to familiarize everyone.
Everything gone, just like that. From the wharf to the wilds. You gotta hand it to the Calamity. It did the job quick. But it missed a few spots, didn't it? Besides, if not for the Calamity, we wouldn't have this distillery chock full of the finest spirits. An arsenal packing enough heat to remind the beast of the wild who's boss. Or even that shrine, in case the gods ain't dead. The Calamity gave us something else. A story. That may not sound like much. Well, wait till you hear it.
Alright, so that's Bastion. And Bastion was part of the Summer Arcade 2011, and it went on to win over 100 industry awards. This is sort of we sort of built a shrine in our own office. A little self-indulgent, I guess. As I said, the initial commercial release was on the Xbox 360, but following Aaron's advice, we eventually released on PC, Mac, Linux, Chrome. Eventually became a part of the Humble Bundle, and came out on the iPad and iPhone as well. Before I sort of get into the details about Supergiant, I just wanted to cover a little bit about myself and who I am and sort of how I got into the game industry in the first place. I graduated from MIT in 2006 with a degree in computer science. And it was there that I first realized that you can actually make a living making games. This is an actual career path that people do. And that makes sense, considering that video games are what got me interested in computer science in the first place. As a 6-year-old, I would play all these games, and I just was wondering how do you make these things? So it just seemed fitting that that's where it eventually led me. It's not exactly something my parents were very thrilled about when I told them, but it's something that they've come around to since. So at MIT, a few friends and I made our first game, which is called Cycle Score. The idea of this game was to sort of use exercise to video games to encourage people to exercise, because video game players are notorious for being out of shape. So here you can see pictured as like the early prototype. The woman is here pedaling on the bike, and as she pedals, it generates more energy to the spaceship, and you can kind of float up and down and fire your weapons. It never actually got anywhere beyond this, unfortunately. We were thinking about starting a company and all that stuff, but it never went anywhere. Gym owners weren't. Turns out people who like to exercise don't like video games. So, well, what it did do, that experience of making the games in school and learning about computer science, is help me get a job at Infinity Ward, where I was able to, and lucky enough to work on Call of Duty 4, Modern Warfare, and Call of Duty 2, or Modern Warfare 2. And this was an extremely, extremely valuable experience for me, as I got to learn from some of the best people in the industry about how to make games, how to ship on time, how to do it sort of under budget, or on budget. And I also met and interacted with some of the most talented people in the industry. They helped mentor me through the early days of this whole making games business. So I cannot emphasize enough just how important for me working and learning at a AAA studio was. But after 3 years at Infinity Ward, I started to think back to those cycle score days where I sort of had ambitions to start my own company or be part of a new company, and this idea of going indie. After a while, you sort of get tired of making games where you just run around and shoot people and that sort of thing. I wanted to do something a little bit more meaningful. Luckily for me, at the time, my roommate Amir had similar thoughts. So Amir and I, Amir pictured here on the left. We met in 2005 as summer interns for Electronic Arts in Orlando, Florida. We both happened to move to LA at the same time in 2006, and just ended up as roommates together. And over the years, he was working at EA and I was at Infinity Ward. We sort of talked about, starting an independent game company or striking out on our own. In September of 2009, so Amir and Gavin, here pictured on the right, they quit their job at EA to start Supergiant. They moved into Amir's childhood home in San Jose, and they sort of set up shop there. I was in the middle of shipping Modern Warfare 2 at the time, but once that was done, I joined them soon after. And this is Amir and Gavin in front of this is the very first Supergiant Christmas tree. And here is a picture of the office where Bastion was made. This is very early. This used to be a living room. We just set up all of our computer stuff and everything. But before we go on, I wanted to talk for a second about what does it actually mean to be independent or indie? Aside from working out of the living room of a house or a bedroom. Being indie or independent means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. But this is what it means to us. This is sort of our own core philosophy at Supergiant. It means that we are entirely self-funded. Supergiant took no outside funding. We had no VCs and no investors to sort of answer to. It also means that we own the IP, and also the IP of Bastion, and also all the technology that we use to build it. It means that we are self-determined. So that means we get to decide what game we want to make. And the only people we have to convince that it's actually good is just ourselves. We don't have to convince anyone else. We can just start making it. It also means that we aren't tied to any specific platform. We aren't exclusive anywhere. We can come out anywhere and everywhere. A perfect example of that is when we started making Bastion in 2009, the iPad didn't even exist yet. The iPad didn't even come out until 2010. But we were still able to, 2 years later, release for both the iPad and the iPhone. And sort of along similar lines, it means we can be small and agile. So these opportunities arise, right? The iPad didn't exist. We had no way of knowing that it was going to be such a game changer in the space. But we're still able to sort of take advantage of that device after the fact. Whereas maybe a bigger company, there would probably be lots of meetings, a lot of process before they decide to act on that. And finally, it means that while we're shouldering all of the risk, this is a very high risk endeavor. It also means that we get all of the reward. So back to the story. In the early days, as you can see, we had no artist. It was just Amir and Gavin basically working 2 weeks at a time, prototyping solutions to particular design problems or gameplay challenges. And we forced ourselves to show it to close friends and colleagues and get feedback early on. Even when the game was looking like this, where we just were stealing images off the internet and scanning Dungeons and Dragons books. But the advantage of that was that this meant the game always had to run. We always had a working demo, something to show someone. And the first 6 months sort of just flew by. And we eventually took an early prototype of the game to GDC. It looked slightly better than this, but not much. And showed it to sort of a wider audience of our friends and colleagues that we had developed from our days working in the AAA space. They told us that the game, while it showed promise, wasn't quite ready to show publishers or the general public yet. And so we took that feedback and it became very clear that we needed an artist. So quickly after that, Jen joined the team as art director, shown here. She also likes to dress in costumes. Her impact was sort of immediate and obvious to just the entire game across the board. And then so six or 8 months after that, we showed Bastion publicly for the first time at PAX Prime in Seattle. And so PAX is a show that's open to the public, as opposed to, say, a show like E3, which is sort of industry insiders and media. And the reason we chose to show the game and debut the game at PAX is that we wanted to show our fans first, and show the people who would actually be buying the game. One of the reasons is publishers and that sort of thing are very risk averse. Right? They don't want to invest in you until they know that the game is going to sell. They don't want to help you out until they think it's going to be a success. And nothing sort of puts them more at ease than having long lines to play your game at a show like PAX or something like that. So very soon after PAX, we started getting calls from various publishers. We were nominated by the IGF for both art and audio awards. And eventually we signed a distribution deal with Warner Brothers. We got into the Summer Arcade, and we had this big, awesome E3 banner outside in front of E3, thanks to Warner Brothers. And it all culminated in February of last year, where Bastion was awarded the downloadable title of the year from the Academy of Interactive Arts and Sciences. This award is particularly special to us because it's something that's voted on by members of the community rather than media or the public. Shown here is Greg on the left in the green shirt. He's the creative director at Supergiant, and that's Amir on the right again. They both look like they're about to throw up because they were very, very nervous that day. So I just want to talk a little bit about how we made Bastion and sort of the process, the thought process and development process along that. People often ask us, like, oh, where did the idea come from? Where is this grand vision? We don't really ever have a grand vision. We kind of just make it up as we go along. What we do is solve problems. That's what we're all very good at as a team. So the first step then is to identify a problem, or the problem that you're trying to solve. What is it that you're trying to do? Then the second step that we do is look at all the other games and look out there and see what are the conventional solutions. Like, what does everyone else do? What does the player expect of the solution to be? And I think this is a very important step because it means it kind of gives you the headroom for failure. And I'll get to what that means in a second. So the next thing is to just try something entirely new. Right? Now that you know what everybody else is doing, just go try to be different, try to be remarkable. And then you can just look and say, is this better? I mean, if you've done something better, then great, keep it and move on. But if it's not, this is why we do step number 2. If what we've done is like, oh, this is way worse, there's a reason why everybody does it this way. This is not going to work. That means we just fall back to number 2, and we just do what everybody else has done. And so that really relieves a lot of the stress of, oh, is this going to work? Is this not going to work? Because if it doesn't work, you can always just fall back to the convention. So a specific example, the floating tiles in Bastion. People often ask us, where did that idea come from? What is that? And really, it was just trying to solve a problem. We were trying to solve the problem of players knowing where to go. Where do I go next? You know, we don't want players to be lost. And the conventional solution for that sort of problem is to just give them a map. Show them a mini-map on the screen, or you hit a key and it brings up a map and you can see exactly where you are and exactly where you need to go. And that works. Nobody says that that's not working, but we wanted to try something new. So we said to ourselves, you know, what if instead the world pointed the way? You know, where it forms up beneath you as you move, sort of directing you exactly where to go. And as sort of a happy accident out of that, it allowed us to show the sky. Very few 2D isometric games do you ever look at the sky. You're always just looking at the ground. And the sky is often a place where you can put a lot of really interesting and beautiful art. And so that just came out of that sort of process as a happy accident. There was no grand vision. So technology-wise, as a studio, we only had 2 programmers. So we had some very different decisions to make than, say, a much bigger studio with dozens and dozens of programmers. The most important criteria for us is the ability to rapidly prototype. You know, as I mentioned, our process depends a lot on solving problems and trying new things. So the faster that we can prototype and try new things, it means the more new things we can try, it increases our odds of actually hitting on something new and interesting and different. So to that end, C# is actually a great language for rapid prototyping. You know, from the technical standpoint, things like automatic memory management and garbage collection, along with the good set of really high-level libraries, make it a really good choice for this. And that has headaches later on, which I'll get into, but in terms of just getting up and running fast and quickly, C# was really a good choice. And for us also, XNA was also, the XNA toolkit was also really good for rapid prototyping, especially for 2D arcade-style games. Out of the box, XNA did a lot of the low-level work for us, you know, like graphics device management, asset loading, or sprite batching. And even though we eventually rewrote or wrote a lot of the low-level code ourselves, having XNA in the early days really helped get everything up and running quickly. And of course, there are other factors. XNA was sort of the only way to get on the Xbox 360 at the time using C#. And it also helped that they were both free. And the one downside, though, was that there was no existing content creation tools. There were no editors or anything like that. So we had to build all of that stuff ourselves. So with only 2 programmers, like it or not, we kind of all had to do a little bit of everything. That means tools, gameplay, graphics, networking, systems, even a little bit of IT. You know, the task list for making games is sort of never ending. There's always more to do, and it would be sort of overwhelming to try to think about all of it at the same time. There's just too much. So it just meant that at any given time, we had to be working on what was the next most important thing. Whether or not you liked doing it, whether or not you found it interesting, if it was the most important thing, you had to be doing it. Because if you didn't do it, nobody else would. And this is a huge contrast to the days of working at a big company or AAA studio that has dozens and dozens of programmers, and you can go off in a corner and spend 2 months writing a particle system or a save system or something like that and making it fully optimized and making the code beautiful, no hacks or anything like that. But at a small company like Supergiant, you really only have like a week or two to get something up and running before you have to move on to the next most important thing. So that kind of begs the question then, why don't we just hire a lot of people? Why don't we get dozens and dozens of programmers and have them do all of the boring and uninteresting work? And then myself and Gavin, we can just do the things that we think are the most fun. Well, so back when we were starting out, a good friend of mine that I worked on CycleScore together actually with, and he sort of became a mentor to Supergiant, Dave Edery, shown here, told us about a research study conducted by Stanford University, which said that there are basically 5 types of company cultures. The first type is sort of was known as like a star culture. So these types of companies, there's 1 or 2 superstars at a company. They do all of the heavy lifting, and they are all the talent, and everybody else who joins this company is sort of in support of those stars. You can sort of think of it like a rock star. Right? There's a rock star, and then there's his whole entourage, and that's kind of how those companies work. The second type of company the study showed was what's called an engineering company. These companies are also very much about the work, but it's more sort of evenly spread. Everyone is like a company of peers. They're all heads down, concerned about the craft, and there's very little management, and there's very little process there. They're all pointed in the same direction, and they work together towards a goal. Now, the third type of company culture was what's called the commitment culture. And here, these are the companies that want to be a family. One of the most important criteria here is the loyalty to the company. Why are people hired? The first and foremost question is, do they fit in? Obviously, you care about whether or not they can do the work, but really you care a lot more, do they get along with everyone else? And are they a good fit? The fourth kind of company is the bureaucracy, and very large companies tend to be these. This is companies that have a lot of management, people join it for the work, and they have a lot of skills, but everything is sort of driven by a process. There's a 4-step checklist for everything that you do. And the last kind of company they found are what are called autocracies. And these are just companies where all they care about is making a ton of money, and the people at the top of the people in charge kind of don't care about the well-being or the welfare of anybody else in the company. It's just, what is the bottom line? So at Supergiant, we chose a culture of commitment. You really only get one chance to determine the cultural DNA of your company. Once it's sort of set, it's very, very difficult to change. And for us, as sort of a close-knit and tight group of friends, culture of commitment made a lot of sense. Some people, Darren and Amir, have known each other since they were 8 years old. They played soccer together way back when they were about this tall. The upside of a commitment culture is that there's a lot of trust among the members, and there's a high level of collaboration. allows us to work remotely. When I'm in Taiwan giving a talk, they know I'm still working as well at nights remotely. They believe that that's happening. They don't need me to check in all the time, and vice versa. The downside to commitment culture, of course, is that it's really, really hard to hire, and it's really, really hard to grow. But it's something that we've stuck to, and we've been richly rewarded for. In the last year, we've slowly added 3 more members to our team, and each has been more and more impactful than the next. Now, when it comes to decision making at Supergiant, we sort of borrowed our philosophy from the movie Sunshine. For those who aren't familiar, Sunshine is a movie about a team of astronauts and scientists who are sort of sent off into space to save the Earth. And in one particular scene in the movie, there's a crisis, an emergency going on, and everyone's kind of arguing and talking about what they think everyone should do. And at one point, the captain says, "We are not a democracy. We're a collection of astronauts and scientists, so we're going to make the most informed decision available to us, made by the person best qualified." At Supergiant, we are a collection of artists and programmers and designers and musicians. So when it comes to making decisions about art, Jen, our art director, makes the decision. When it comes to low-level technical things, I'll make the decision. If it comes to gameplay programming decisions, Gavin will do it. If it comes to design, Amir will make the decision, so on and so forth. So the success of Bastion, though, was not free. It actually came at quite a considerable cost, not just to our savings accounts. We worked 18, 20, 22-hour days. We barely slept. As Alex said in his talk, making games is really, really hard. I used to drive 5 hours back and forth between Los Angeles and San Jose, sometimes in the same day. And our wives and girlfriends, they really put up with a lot from us, and we are very, very grateful for everything that they did. And the whole thing could have just as easily have failed completely and utterly. But luckily, I think we were young and dumb enough to fail. We knew that we could probably go back to working in the industry if Supergiant collapsed. Sure, we would have lost some money and 2 years of our time, but we're at an age where we could easily afford that. Fortunately, though, it did have a happy ending. Here's a picture of us in the brand new office in San Francisco. We're sort of setting up the new space. You can see the tables are the same. And we've gotten married to those same girlfriends who stood by us through the whole ordeal of Bastion. Here's a picture of Darren and our audio director with his wife. They got married last June. This is Amir, the studio director, and Anna, who got married just 2 months ago, actually. And this is a picture of me and my wife. We got married last August. So, what comes next now that Bastion was a hit and a success, and, we've all gotten married? What do? Do we retire to a beach? No. Do we do more of Bastion? Come out on more platforms? We could make Bastion 2. After Bastion came out, a lot of people came to us and said, "Hey, do you want to make our game for us?" Or do we just do something entirely brand new? A brand new IP or something like that. The great thing about being independent is that we got to make this decision. So for the year after Bastion shipped, we spent it bringing Bastion to 5 additional platforms. And that included a complete reimagination of Bastion for the iPhone and the iPad. You know, we completely redid the controls for touch because that's a completely different type of interface. And another sort of really important philosophy for us is that every version of Bastion has to be the best, or the most recent version of Bastion has to be the best version of Bastion that there is. You know, so the original Xbox and PC versions, you can show here they scored an 86 or something on Metacritic, and the iOS version, which was the last version that was released, has a 94. But to be honest, after a while, we really were Bastioned out. We were really tired of working on Bastion. So at that point, we decided to make our next game, Transistor, shown here. Where Bastion was our take on the fantasy genre, Transistor is sort of our take on science fiction. And I'll show the trailer for that as well.
When you speak, I hear silence. Every word a defiance. I can hear, oh, I can hear. Think I'll go where it suits me. Moving down to a country with everyone, oh, everyone. Before we
So that is Transistor. And to help us make Transistor, we've slowly grown our to 10 people. That's Michael, who's sort of the office manager and runs the store for Bastion. That's Chris, over there on the bottom left. He's the third programmer to join the team. And there's Camilo, who is a 3D animator and modeler. From a technical standpoint, we've migrated away from XNA to our own fork of MonoGame. This was actually really important for us because one of the limitations to XNA is that we didn't own the source code. We were sort of at the mercy of the various maintainers at Microsoft when it came to bug fixes or new features. A lot of time near the end of Bastion, for example, was spent coming up with workarounds or hacks for bugs within the XNA framework because the fixes weren't going to be there in time for us. C# was also a risky decision at the time. You know, C# at the time only ran on Xbox 360 and the PC. But since then, thanks to a company called Xamarin and the Mono project, C# now runs on Mac, Linux, iOS, Android, and also the PlayStation 4. And this is a huge benefit to us, as you know, native ports done in C or C++, they can easily take over a year or more. You know, compare that to the fact that within a year we were able to come out on 5 additional platforms for Bastion. And that's sort of really a big deal for us because there's only, as I said, there were only 2 and now 3 programmers on the team. We don't have unlimited programming resources. You know, there's a small performance cost with C#. Now I'm going to get a little bit technical just for a second here because I'm a programmer. There's a small performance cost with C# over native C++, but it's not as large or as big as it used to be. You know, there's now what's called full ahead of time compilation technology, and that means the overhead is basically negligible. The one big disadvantage of C# is that you can't take advantage of a lot of the existing libraries and tools for making games that are already out there that are written in C++. For instance, when we brought Bastion to Steam, I had to spend an entire week just writing a C# wrapper around the Steam API instead of just going directly to Steam itself. We have similar issues with using stuff like Bank or Fmod. And also, of course, as I talked about, one of the advantages of C# is the automatic memory management and garbage collection, but these are things that are great at the beginning. You can just not worry about them. But when it comes time to the end, the memory still really matters, and you still really need to know what's going on. For Bastion, I spent 3 months reorganizing and optimizing the engine so that the garbage collector never had to run during gameplay. The bulk of the engine is still in C#, although we've replaced our homegrown scripting language with Lua. I talked about solving problems as part of the process. Creating our own custom scripting language is not a problem that we need to solve. Lua is made by a very talented individual, and he's a much better compiler or language engineer than either Gavin or I ever could be. But all our tools are still 100% done in-house, which I think was a disadvantage at first, but has now become actually one of our greatest assets. This is important because as game programmers, you really have 2 clients that you're serving. The first and the obvious one is the people who eventually play the game players, right? That you're making technology for them. But you're also making tech for the artists and the designers and the people who are making the game as well. So it's really important that we're able to customize and tailor the tools to the specific needs of just our 4 artists and designers. So I've covered kind of a lot very quickly, but if you're also thinking about going indie, here are a few things I think sort of take away. For us, our studio in particular, I think the early experience with AAA studios was extremely valuable. We went through all of the terrible crunch periods and saw all the things that they did wrong, but it also taught us how to, kind of sit down and ship the game. It's certainly not the only way, but I think that we benefited a lot from that. Second point I would say is think very carefully about who you start a company with or who you work with, and what you want your culture to be. Because once that's sort of set, it's very, very difficult to change, and it will sort of determine the course of how your company grows over time. The third point is just try to focus as much as you can on one thing at a time. There's always going to be a million things left to do, always a million things on the horizon. But it's really important, I think, to sort of identify the next most important problem, prioritize it, and just focus on that one thing. And finally, I would say safeguard your independence. You've worked really hard and taken a lot of risk to get to the point that you are, where you're independent. And so don't just give it away. So that's everything. Thank you very much, and let me know if you have questions.
我们这场大概有稍微长一点的时间可以提问，所以有没有在场的朋友要发问的？
The best part of Bastion for me is the narrative, and why you decide to put in narrative, and how do you find this awesome voice?
Okay, so I'll answer the easy one first. The voice is actually done by Logan Cunningham. He is another one of the guys who used to play soccer with Amir when they were 8 years old or so. And he just happened to be an actor and have a really awesome voice. In terms of how we came up with the idea, again, it kind of goes back to our process. The problem we were trying to solve was, how do you tell a story in a game without sort of beating the player over the head with it? You know, the conventional solution is to just have text on the screen, and to just, or you pick up little, you know, a game like BioShock or something, you pick up little audio recordings and then you get to listen to them as you go. So that was what the conventional solution was, and this was just, I think, one late night, you know, Mir tried, well, what if we just had a voice that would just kind of talk as you went along? And we had Logan record some lines and we threw it in there, and it was like, oh wow, this is really cool. So that is another thing that kind of just came out of the experimentation process. You know, we had no idea when we set out to make Bastion. It wasn't like we're gonna make a game where an old man talks to you the whole time. That was not at all what we were thinking. So.
好，还有没有其他的问题？
Hi, thanks for sharing. So basically, during 2009, 2012, I was working at Warner Brothers. I remember at some point they have a big conference talking about the whole games they produce, and talking about Bastion, about their worry about the slow selling pickup when the Bastion first released. So I was wondering, like, how they work with you. Did they give you any pressures, or any like direction changes throughout the whole thing?
Okay, so there's a question about whether or not Warner Brothers sort of pressured us early on. Yeah, we actually, it's true, like the launch of Bastion was not what we expected, but Warner Brothers in general was pretty hands-off on that sort of thing. So they were really good to work with in that sense.
有没有4楼的问题？4楼有人举手吗？4楼没有，还有没有？楼下还有朋友有问题吗？
Hi, thanks Andrew for the sharing. I'm wondering what was the most difficult decision that you had to do as an indie, and I mean like what was like the most difficult challenge you faced, and how did you handle it? Thanks.
Okay, so I guess there are a number of pretty challenging things. One of them is to just sort of have the, you know, we went early on to GDC and showed an early prototype of the game, and people were like, no, you can't show this to anyone. This is not where it needs to be yet. And I think there weren't any like technical problems that needed to be overcome. It was more just having the faith to keep going and convincing ourselves that we're on the right track and that this was going to be, you had to sort of take a big leap of faith that this would end well. And then sort of on the flip side, you know, at the end when Bastion, as you alluded to, when Bastion first came out, it wasn't, you know, a runaway success right out of the gate. It wasn't exactly what we had hoped for. But over time, as we came out on more and more platforms and we kind of developed our own momentum, it got better and better. And again, it was just having the faith to just keep on going and the confidence to know that we're on the right track.
还有朋友有问题吗？如果没有的话，我这边想要提一个问题。So I have a question for you, okay? It's about technical stuff. So for all the buzz about Unity, would you suggest to use a model game if they weren't familiar with XNA at all? Like to choose between model game and Unity?
I guess, so my own personal opinion, I guess, is that Unity is really good for 3D games. And I'm not sure if you get the source to Unity, but if you're happy with kind of their look and what they do, I think that Unity is a great choice. For us personally, we were going the 2D route, which is actually very difficult to do in an engine like Unity. You just basically end up taking a 3D game and making it look 2D, which is kind of a roundabout way of doing it. And then with Mono Game, of course, it's open source, which has the nice, you know, you get everything and you can just modify and tailor it to exactly what you need.
我们还有其他的问题吗？ 楼上都没有问题吗 ？Okay, then I think that's about it.
All right, thanks very much.